Sprawling sci-fi RPGs aren't built in a day. Welcome to MojoPlays, and today we're taking a look at the origins of the Mass Effect series.
I can't believe Caden didn't make it. How could we just leave him down there?
Alenko knew the risks going in. He gave his life to save the rest of us.
Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to MojoPlays and click on the links in the description to vote on upcoming content. Bioware is a developer whose legacy basically speaks for itself, but the company's humble origin story isn't exactly common knowledge. Pop quiz: how do you celebrate surviving the gauntlet that is med school? Well, by working in the medical field to fund your true passion, video game development. Having studied together, gamed together, and developed medical simulator programs together, University of Alberta graduates Ray Muzyka, Greg Zeschuk, and Augustine Yip took that hard-earned money from their last few years of practice and, in 1995, applied themselves to the challenging and risky task of making their very own video game. Thus, Bioware was born.
We're going to talk about how video games can evoke a feeling and even try and show why these feelings that video games evoke is actually different, if not more powerful than other forms of art.
Their first title, a mech simulator by the name of Shattered Steel, was released in 1996 and was considered a moderate success. But it garnered praise for some of its more innovative mechanics, something that Bioware would earn a reputation for with their future releases. The developers next turned their focus to producing a demo called Battleground Infinity. Their publisher, Interplay Entertainment, which was known for its video game adaptations of popular properties like Star Trek, suggested that the gameplay would be a good fit for their Dungeons & Dragons license. After 3 years of development, the critically acclaimed and highly influential Baldur's Gate was released in December of 1998. Though Bioware would produce a number of titles in the years following Baldur's Gate, the final crucial piece of the puzzle in laying the experiential groundwork for Mass Effect was the development of Star Wars: Knights of the Old Republic, an ambitious role-playing game steeped in the rich mythology of Star Wars. Many of the gameplay mechanics from this groundbreaking fan-favorite Star Wars title would go on to serve as the foundation for Mass Effect, namely the party system, combat, and freedom to choose the order in which you tackle your missions. It also gave the studio a taste for telling stories set in a sprawling sci-fi universe. The time had finally come for Bioware to take all of that experience and craft a massive property of their very own.
We wanted to take the formula that we brought to that kind of role-playing game experience, where you can create a character, be who you want to be, and really develop that character over the course of a game.
The release of Mass Effect was accompanied by a short documentary, which took us behind the scenes to explore the development process. As project director Casey Hudson explained in The Making of, Mass Effect was born from the team's desire to create an RPG of the same scope, complexity, and richness as KOTOR, but without the limitations of operating within the confines of an existing intellectual property. Bioware knew they wanted to stay within the sci-fi realm, but apart from that, they had a whole galaxy worth of decisions to make. So, they started with what mattered most to them: the mechanics, gameplay, and rules that would provide a framework on which the story could be built. They also looked at the emotional beats and the sort of interpersonal connections they wanted to build into the story as well, since the franchise was being envisioned as a trilogy from the very beginning. Getting this first installment right was essential.
It actually just, makes the main story more interesting, because you know that main story is set inside a larger galaxy. So,
of course, it wasn't just world building that proved daunting during the early days of Mass Effect. Bringing this ever-expanding vision to life required technological development as well. Though the Unreal 3 engine served as a foundation for the game, the various gameplay mechanics, including space exploration and squad-based combat, as well as the use of highly detailed and expressive digital actors, meant that Bioware had to break new ground by developing programs and technologies that simply didn't exist yet. Even more so than in Knights of the Old Republic or Jade Empire, their other game to employ a morality system, Bioware wanted Mass Effect to be really defined by the choices the player made. From the fallout of big decisions right down to the subtle effects of taking certain conversational paths when talking to NPCs. This meant a whole lot of carefully coordinated writing. Thankfully, Drew Karpyshyn, who had previously worked with Bioware on numerous titles, including Knights of the Old Republic, was once again on board as lead writer. Under his experienced and watchful eye, this colossal story with its various junctures was carefully and painstakingly crafted to ensure a consistent tone, style, and narrative flow.
Look, I didn't pick the name. One of the instructors in flight school used to bug me about never smiling. She started calling me Joker, and it stuck.
To call the first Mass Effect an ambitious game is a gross understatement. From the aforementioned character freedom to its combat system, which uniquely blended RPG tactics and customization with the intensity of real-time third-person shooters, Mass Effect was designed to deliver a gaming experience unlike any before it. In May of 2006, 8 months after the game's announcement and about a year and a half before its release, a Mass Effect demo was presented at E3, where all of BioWare's hard work was greeted with a response that proved that they were on the right track. It took home the Most Innovative Design Award and established itself as one of the most anticipated games of 2007 in the process. Thankfully, when the game hit store shelves on November 20th, 2007, it lived up to the hype. The game was praised for its cinematic scope and visuals, expressive characters, and interactive approach to storytelling. The combat system, vehicle control, and AI, on the other hand, were considered weak points. Nonetheless, the game managed to take home a number of awards, respect, and devotion from a demographic of gamers who expect more from their video games. For this planned trilogy, things were off to a good start.
Let's not do anything we're all gonna regret.
Why not? What have we got to lose?
That being said, all of this attention and praise led to the mainstream news getting their hands on a story that was way too juicy to pass up, even though they didn't fully understand it. Fox News' now infamous Sex Box segment, which was a follow-up to an article from evangelical blogger Kevin McCullough, who called the game virtual orgasmic rape, basically just invented aspects of the in-game sex scenes that were just flat-out inaccurate, totally misrepresenting the game without context. Jeff Keighley defended the game in the segment, but the fact that no one else had, played the game meant that he was basically outnumbered. EA, the publisher, defended the game too, and McCullough eventually apologized for his article that sparked the outrage in the first place. But there's no telling how much damage the report actually did to the game's mainstream image at the time. Even so, it certainly didn't seem to slow the folks over at BioWare down at all.
That was incredible, Shepard.
Ready for round 2?
Development of Mass Effect 2 started almost immediately after the release of the first title, if not a little before. Casey Hudson returned as project director, and alongside his team, he quickly set about crafting a worthy sequel. Their goal was not only to continue the story of Commander Shepard and the threat of the Reapers, but to improve on the shortcomings of the original game by taking to heart the feedback they'd received. First and foremost on their list of development priorities was the combat system, which had taken the brunt of the criticism. The RPG elements were cut back in favor of a more streamlined shooter approach, with the intention of making combat not just more functional, but more fun too. The exploration system was also given a serious overhaul. Though the initial concept from the first game was commendable, it proved overambitious and resulted in rather boring, sparse landscapes and a repetitive gameplay experience. Planetary exploration became a chore rather than an exciting adventure. In Mass Effect 2, the developers focused on making sure that every planet players could visit was as fresh and diverse as one would expect when partaking in interplanetary exploration. In terms of design and player experience, each location was tailored to reward the player with something new and exciting.
My name is Karina. If you need information about the area, it would be my pleasure to assist you.
Though the development of Mass Effect 2 was aided by the fact that they were building upon the existing systems and technologies put in place during the development of the first installment, it was far from being a streamlined process. In addition to the aforementioned key points, according to Hudson, nearly every aspect of the original game was scrutinized and refined to improve the player experience. They also faced other challenges, including the coordination required by a portion of development being given to a team at EA Montreal, and the 2009 flu epidemic, which took out much of the team in the home stretch of development. As Hudson told GamesRadar in 2010, however, despite these obstacles, BioWare managed to deliver the game. On time, on budget, and exceeding quality goals.
We're at war. No one wants to admit it, but humanity is under attack.
Unfortunately, some players may have disagreed with the last part of that statement. When it shipped out, Mass Effect 2 had some on-screen text that was very hard to read unless played on a standard definition TV. This is an issue that BioWare actually never resolved, claiming that it was impossible to alter via update. There were also reports of frequent crashes, save bugs, and some more. The majority of these issues were quickly resolved, however, and what remained was a true feat of video game engineering. BioWare had set out with the aim of improving upon the first game in every conceivable way, and for the most part, they fully succeeded.
You are a valuable asset to all of humanity. Be careful, Shepard.
Even more so than the first game, Mass Effect 2 proved to be a cinematic video game experience. One that, because of the player's ability to influence the story, made for a very personal and emotionally driven journey. Though some felt that the RPG elements had been oversimplified, this critique was relatively minor compared to the heaps of praise the game received in pretty much every other regard. Riding high on the wave of success generated by Mass Effect 2, it was time for BioWare to close out the trilogy and finish the story they'd been developing since 2004. Production had already begun on Mass Effect 3 before Mass Effect 2 was released. Nonetheless, under the guidance of Casey Hudson, Bioware once again carefully considered gamer feedback about the preceding installment before refining the gameplay experience for its third outing. Because so much of the groundwork had already been laid out, Mass Effect 3 was expected to be released by the end of 2011, just under 2 years after its predecessor. But it was ultimately delayed, instead being released on March 6, 2012. Mass Effect 3 proved to be a complicated beast. In the past 2 installments, Bioware had not only created their own dense universe, but started a story that was deeply personal, convoluted, and made up of many moving parts. Translation, they'd given themselves a near insurmountable challenge, crafting a worthy game and a conclusion to one of the most remarkable franchises in recent gaming history. According to popular opinion, they simply couldn't deliver on both fronts.
You pull this off, and I'm making you an honorary Krogan.
As far as gameplay is concerned, Mass Effect 3 was the perfect culmination of what came before it. Bioware had established itself as a studio that listened to its fans, and Mass Effect was the ultimate proof. Just like in Mass Effect 2, completed save games of the past installment would influence your story in the new installment. 3 types of gameplay were offered too, making it appealing to gamers of various types. Those who love RPGs and interactivity, those looking for action, and those who want both. The combat was also further refined, with introduction of new elements like class-specific melee attacks to deliver even better action too. In terms of tough choices, Mass Effect 3 asked you to make decisions with huge stakes.
This isn't your problem, Commander. You don't know me.
But I'd like to. Hang in there.
Mass Effect 3 also saw the introduction of the franchise's first multiplayer component, Galaxy at War. Though it didn't revolutionize multiplayer like Mass Effect arguably did with single-player campaigns, it was technically kind of fun. And most interestingly, it actually had an influence on your single-player campaign in the form of a readiness rating. In terms of storyline and cinematic qualities, Mass Effect 3 was equal, if not an improvement on its predecessors. That is, until the ending. Mass Effect was a game about choices, and for some incomprehensible reason, the game's conclusion effectively threw a lot of that out of the window, making it so the players were no longer masters of their own destiny and effectively neutering the big decisions they'd made earlier in the game. Fans were livid. A Retake Mass Effect campaign was started. Fans filed official complaints with the Federal Trade Commission and the Better Business Bureau. Bioware had cultivated a relationship with their fans that said, "We listen and we care about what you want from this franchise." And then they released this ending, which seemed to be the complete opposite of that. Sure, there were choices, but it felt like they all played out the same.
It all happened so very long ago.
When can I go to the stars?
An extended cut was eventually released, which filled in some of the plot holes and made for a more satisfying end to the story. But without a complete revamp of that ending, the conclusion remains a low note in a trilogy otherwise comprised of 3 excellent games. It was a less than ideal way to end it, but iffy conclusion aside, the franchise was brought to a close just as Bioware always intended it, as a complex and satisfying trilogy. Or so we thought. After Mass Effect 3, the folks at Bioware were forced to ask themselves a tough question. What's next? Controversies aside, Mass Effect had nonetheless become a major franchise, so it's hard to let one of those lie dormant. The plan was to deviate from the Shepard story and explore the wider universe of Mass Effect, placing the focus on exploration in a new setting, the Andromeda galaxy. On paper it sounded great, but early on there were red flags in the development process. The biggest was the studio shift, which saw the bulk of the work move from BioWare's long-standing Edmonton studio to one in Montreal. Then, in 2014, trusted project director Casey Hudson left BioWare altogether. Then, after having used many of the same systems and programs for the original trilogy, a decision was made during production to embrace the Frostbite 3 engine, which meant, much like the original Mass Effect, everything needed to be built from the ground up. Along with Hudson, a number of key creatives behind the original trilogy left during the game's development. It's not like Mass Effect Andromeda was one of the worst games ever made. Far from it. On average, it actually scored between 6 and 8 on 10, passable to respectable scores for most games. But coming from BioWare and their critically acclaimed franchise, fans who had been waiting years for the next installment were understandably let down. The game lacked polish, suffered from a number of jarring bugs, and was as disappointing in the character animation department as earlier installments were impressive. Andromeda was a game defined by its ambition and its failure to follow through. And that's how you go from being one of the most anticipated games of 2017 to one of the biggest disappointments.
Now I feel better.
A short time after Andromeda's controversial release, Kotaku news editor Jason Schreier released an article titled "The Story Behind Mass Effect Andromeda's Troubled 5-Year Development." Although we recommend you actually go out and read that article because it's great. In short, it revealed, through first-hand accounts from people who had worked on the game throughout its development, a tumultuous, stressful, and ultimately unproductive production that ultimately led to many of the problems fans and critics had with the game, including those notorious facial animations. The resulting game fell drastically short of the standards set by the franchise, and what one would reasonably expect from such a lengthy development period.
Left a perfectly adequate career as a chief officer. Provincial capital, too. Only a new galaxy could pull me away.
Following the poor showing of Mass Effect Andromeda, Bioware Montreal was effectively dissolved, and the Mass Effect franchise was put into an indefinite state of hibernation. However, in 2017, project director Casey Hudson returned to Bioware as the new general manager, giving fans hope that, perhaps after a little downtime, the franchise could very well return to deliver its greatest story yet. Who knows? Stranger things have happened in this galaxy.
But Shepard, they'll follow him. He's a hero, a bloody icon. But he's just one man. If we lose Shepard, humanity might well follow.
Thanks for watching Mojo Plays. Be sure to subscribe and click on the link in the description below to check out our suggestion page and vote on what content you'd like to see us cover next.